all four Gospels chronologically.
And in the end, your heart will be left in Jerusalem. So come experience the Word of God come alive and gain a greater understanding of biblical holidays and a historic culture
That in many ways is still the same today as it was 2,000 years ago.
Come experience the life of the Messiah.
So that was a little video about the Bible College in Jerusalem, just so you guys can have an idea of what we do. And yeah, we're here visiting. So maybe we can do the first slide. First of all, before I start, I want to say this is so much fun for me, and I'm so excited to be here and to tell you guys a story. And it's a story about faith. But also, when you have faith, you have the other side of faith, which is the lies and the things that we really struggle to put that faith into action. So I am going to share with you guys two stories. And one story is of great faith, and one story is of little faith. I am much more connected to the story of little faith. So maybe slide change. Thank you. Okay. So before we talk about that, on the table, I brought little cards, and they say the definition of faith. And I'll read it to you. The faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, just like that was in that skit. In the card on the table, it says it's being certain of what we don't see. So I'm 40, old enough to have 20 years behind me of being a believer, so I've seen the evidence of God being with me. I've seen him be faithful, and I know that you guys probably have maybe more years than me or less than me, but we all have that evidence that speaks to us of his faithfulness. And sometimes my husband and I, when we're discouraged, we will walk through Jerusalem and where we live in the forest, and we'll tell each other our faith stories. And that is the thing that encourages us when we are reminded of like what God has done. The evidence is that he's still with us because he's faithful. So next slide. And I just want to say really quickly that all the pictures in the slides are actually pictures that I've taken of where I live or something, mostly, where I live. So I live in the Jerusalem forest, and this is where my husband and I walk and tell the stories of faith. I know it's really special, so I'm going to tell you guys some sad stories too, so you don't think that it's too wonderful, because it is really great. But before we get to that, okay, so Matthew chapter 8. Now when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him pleading and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed and tormented." And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." Next slide. The centurion answered and said, "Lord, I'm not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. For I am also a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and I say to the other, 'Come,' and he comes, and do this, and he does it." Next slide. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, and he said to those who followed, "Surely I say to you, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel." Story of great faith. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go your way, as you have believed, so let it be done for you." And his servant was healed the same hour. The next story, next slide, is a story of little faith. And this is probably the one that we relate to a little bit more, having little faith. In the same chapter, this is Matthew chapter 8, farther down there's a story, and it goes like this. When Jesus got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And suddenly a great storm arose on the sea, so that he got into the boat, and it was covered with waves. The boat was covered with waves, but Jesus was asleep. Next slide. Then his disciples came to him, and they woke him up, saying, "Lord, save us. We're drowning." But he said to them, "Why are you fearful, you of little faith?" Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. So the men marveled, saying, "Who can this be, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So what was the difference between the two stories? One was great, one was little. The centurion, he was not even Jewish. He was a centurion. He was from probably Rome, and he was a Gentile, and he wasn't maybe as familiar with Jesus, but he recognized authority because he had authority. And so he knew that Jesus had the authority of God, that he was the Son of God. And because he understood that, he knew that he only needed to speak a word. But the disciples, they were too familiar with Jesus. And sometimes that's like how we are. We're in the church, or we're raised in church, or we hear the songs, or we're reading our Bible, but our hearts are hardened. And Jesus says, "Why is your heart hardened? That you don't understand?" So they thought that they were going to drown. At least they accused Jesus of letting them practically perish. Don't you care? In the Hebrew, when I'm reading it, it actually says in Hebrew, "Don't you care?" So they needed to understand that if Jesus was the Son of God, that he had all authority and that he was in control. So, with our two stories of faith, the next slide is the lies and objections, because I like to think about the other side of it. And so, the Bible college students, this past semester, we were talking about faith and being in truth, walking in truth. And so I asked them, "What's a lie that you believe?" And they all kind of thought about it. And then one by one, we went around the room, and everyone pretty quickly knew a lie that they believed. And it's funny how lies are like that. We know they're not true, but for whatever reason, we believe them. So, next slide. The sad thing is when I asked the girls, I could pretty much surmise about 9 out of 10 said the same lie. Of course, they're about 20, so I wasn't too surprised for them all to tell me that they were worthless. Can you believe that? That they thought they were worthless. They knew it wasn't true because they are made in the image of God, and they knew they had value, but for whatever reason, this was what was coming into them. They're worthless. And I asked them, take the truth and apply it to your lie. And then they wrote it down on sticky notes and put it by their bed, and throughout the semester, I just asked them to keep repeating the truth to themselves. And so, lies, like I put here, we have to be perfect. We need to be perfect. I don't actually struggle with perfectionism, but I know some people do. And, thinking that you need to be in control, that's more my line of a lie. I need to be in control because there's this lack of trusting that God is good, that he's going to see you through, that you're going to drown. And I know that maybe you guys can relate to that. So I actually would ask you to think about if there's a lie that you believe, let your conscience sort of just bring it to you, because it's amazing how we know it. It's right there. I know that I'm thinking this all the time, but it's not true. So with that being said, next slide, I'll tell you guys about my lie. So that's me, by the way. I don't look very happy because I'm not. So something I really struggled with being an orphan and being in foster care is feeling sorry for myself. And I actually had a lot of reasons to believe that I was unloved and rejected. That's the thing about lies, is that they usually have some truth in them, but it wasn't the full story. So, I look pretty upset with the world. This is me kind of figuring, this is actually the age that I first entered into foster care. So my brother, he's actually smiling behind me. He's much sweeter than I am. But I'm not happy about this. And then, like I said, I have a lot of reasons to feel upset because I actually was born here in Los Angeles, probably not too far away, homeless. I lived in a car with my parents, and at one point, my brother and I, sorry you can't see his face, he's really cute. Our parents left us. They didn't come back, and after a week, the police picked us up, and it said in the police report when I read it that we were covered in feces. Yeah, so like I said, I don't look very happy, and I'm not. And then you can imagine that going on from there and being in foster care, that it didn't get a lot better. So by the time that I was 2, I was in foster care. I was a ward of the state of California. By the time that I was, I'll just get my notes really quick just so I can tell you. By the time that I was 6, I was adopted into a family that was a professional foster care family. So you guys can understand a little bit more of what that was like for me. I used to tell people I was adopted, and they were like, "Oh, that's so wonderful." Yeah, it's good. It's good to be adopted. But it was, I felt like a number. Because sometimes in foster care, maybe you guys are involved in it, maybe you know somebody, it hardens your heart to have kids come and go like that. So the people who do it, their hearts are hardened. And they don't see you in your humanity. And they don't tell you the truth. So actually, one of the reasons why I love to talk about lies is because when you're in foster care, you're lied to a lot. My name was changed. My name's actually Catherine. My name was changed when I was 6, and I was told I was forbidden to speak about ever having been adopted. I had to pretend that it wasn't true. And my brother was adopted with me. You can go to the next slide. So, without telling you all the details of 18 years, what I will tell you is that my dad who adopted me, he would count down to me the days that I had left. So, for example, like 3 years, 6 months, 7 days, you're not my problem. So that was my childhood. And that basically kind of explains it without getting into detail. I was on a countdown to being 18. And that actually ended up being this big thing that held over me in my life. I'm going to turn 18. I'm going to have no one. I'm not going to have, any family. And I did end up coming to know the Lord through Calvary Chapel on my 18th birthday. So, but of course, life was still very difficult, but the Lord was my father. And he was a really good father to me. And the thing is, when we come into faith, sometimes there's things behind us that haunt us. But if I were here, I would be thinking, you don't know what I have to carry in the trauma that's in me, and I just can't be happy and smiley like you are. But that actually was just me not really understanding that the Lord, he wanted to heal it, but not in a superficial way of just saying like, oh, and I thought that what I needed to say is like, all things behind me, everything ahead, I'm not going to look back and talk about what happened. But of course, I couldn't stop obsessing about what happened to my mother, because I thought, homeless as we were, whatever, she probably got into drugs, she went to prison. In my mind, I always imagined what would have happened to her, because why would a mother leave her children? Why would that happen? So I had to tell myself some pretty good stories of, she still sees me, she still cares about me. This was my whole childhood. My mother still cares about me. And I felt haunted by it. So I would try to pray and ask the Lord, help me to overcome these feelings that I have, and thinking that they were kind of even wrong at this point. Like it's just good enough. And I was already married to my husband, and I had 3 children, but it just didn't go away. Still there. So one time I was showering, which, by the way, almost every time in the story that I'm telling you that God spoke to me was in the shower, because that's when I'm not with anybody else. And you guys probably understand. I go to the shower so I can talk to God. I don't care about the water bill. It's worth it. So I was showering and I was praying as I do, and I was asking the Lord, help me to, not have these feelings of sadness and loss and rejection, and help me to just overcome. That's what I thought I needed to do, overcome it, looking for the strength to overcome. But as I was saying this to the Lord, I found myself saying something more honest, which is, I just wish I knew the truth. And when I said that, the Lord spoke back to me, and he said, then ask me, because I'm the God of truth. It had never occurred to me to ask God. Of course he knows. But for whatever reason, I didn't think to ask him. And I had tried to find, I had done tons of things to try to find my mother. So I said, okay, so I ask you, tell me the truth. And a little while later, I was talking to my husband, and we were talking about maybe we would want to go somewhere in the world and visit churches somewhere. And I was starting to have that same feeling of feeling sorry for myself because, I don't have a passport, and I don't even have a birth certificate, and all these things that are behind me that are haunting me, I don't even know if I'd be able to get a passport. So it's a good thing that I have to drink water because it helps me to pause. Sometimes the story could get ahead of me. So we started talking maybe about a week after that prayer. And I wasn't thinking about the prayer. I was thinking about, not having a passport. And anyway, so I called social services, even though I was 27 years old. They still had all of my records, and I still was, in a sense, a ward of the state of California. I called social services, and I said, I want to get a passport, and I know that there's some issues with my birth certificate. And she said, she's looking through her papers, and she's like, I can hear on the phone, papers, and she says, okay, I'm looking at your file here, and I do see that you are you are a U.S. citizen. I can look at and see these records. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, wait a minute, somebody knows the truth. I'm on the phone with her. This person knows what happened to my mother. This was like a week after that prayer. So I said, wait, stop. Not about the passport, but can you tell me what happened to my mother? Can you tell me about my life? Do you know? And she said, well, I can tell you some things that are not identifying. If you come into my office, then I'll prepare a report. And so I drove down to San Diego to meet her. I sat in her office, and I came in, and on the table was a file this big. Like, I'm not exaggerating. And I could see that inside of it were pictures, records, documents, reports, and of course, this is everything that I've dreamed of. This is like, it's all there, and it's like I could reach out and touch it. But she said, no, you can't touch it. It's a sealed record. And I guess I was just very obedient because I didn't touch it. And I wanted to. So, it was really surreal to have the information of your life sitting there in front of you, especially after having been lied to so much and going through so much like confusion and not understanding. So she gave me a report, and in the report was a lot of information that didn't identify anybody, but it had first names. So in the report, she said, and your mother's name is this, which, by the way, I already knew, her first name. But her sister's name is Nina, and her other sister's name is Conchetta. And yeah, so that's all I can tell you. And I got up to go on my way, and as I was walking out, she said, I want to tell you one more thing. Your mother, her last name, it starts with a PH, and it's a funny name. And that's all that I can say. So I walked out, and I thought, what am I supposed to do with that? PH, funny name, that's meaningless to me, but it was like a clue. So I'm like, well, maybe. So I don't know if you guys are ever familiar with what a search angel is, but I would always try to do research. And search angels are people who have access to the database. And if you're looking for someone in a situation like mine, they'll run the names through you, and we can try to make guesses about approximately how old someone is. And so when I went home, I gave the search angel all the new information that I had, and I went to bed. And the next morning, when I woke up, he said, "I found your mom." Guess where she was? On Facebook. What? You mean prison Facebook, right? And I couldn't believe it because I went to look at the Facebook page, and this was a woman who was married and who had children and somewhat of a life that was successful. And so I said, this is definitely not her, because my mother couldn't, and she not just wouldn't, but she couldn't. Not only that, but of course, when you are orphan, you're looking for your mom in every crowd. I would be looking for her all the time growing up, thinking, okay, a face like mine. Okay, I can recognize her because she looks like me. That's a clue. But this woman did not look like me. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, and I have a very distinct, edgy face, and it didn't look like me at all. So I said, nope, this isn't her. He's wrong. But then I saw on her Facebook page that it said she had 2 sisters, Nina and Conchetta. Oh, that's coincidental, but maybe, whatever. Still didn't think that it would be her because she didn't have my face. And then I saw that her father was listed John Fliffenstoffer with a PH. And I was like, no way. That can't be a coincidence. Fliffenstoffer? So I decided to write to this person because I figured if she left a daughter and a son, she would remember. And on Facebook you can write people, even if you're not friends with them. So I decided to write to her, and I wrote her a very simple message. And you can show the next slide because I have provided it for you. It says, "Dear Belinda, my name is Catherine Elizabeth Halpern Finch. Do you know who I am? Please let me know." Of course, you're reading ahead because she says, "Yeah, I think you're my daughter." What? Immediately, very close, very short amount of time. And as you can see, I had highlighted in red because I was so shocked. She said, "I'm 99.9% sure if you're my daughter, if Dolly Markham is your adopted mom." And all of a sudden I realized she knew where I was. I wasn't lost, and I was 27. So at that point I figured she would have come to find me if she wanted to. Oh boy, that was hard. Shocking. I was shocked. So, yeah. We talked on the phone that night for about 3 hours. But we didn't talk about me. She talked about herself almost the entire time. But she did tell me something. She said, "Your father's Jewish." And I thought that was really interesting. But we'll get to that. She talked on about herself. Didn't ask me how I was doing. Didn't really seem to be that interested. She was very dismissive. And in the course of her conversation, telling me about her life, she told me about when she was pregnant and how the father didn't want her to have an abortion he wanted her to have an abortion, but she didn't want to because she found out that it was a girl. And she told me, "I found out that it was a girl and I wanted to replace Catherine, so I didn't want to have the abortion. And I'm Catherine." And I couldn't believe that my mother was telling me that she replaced me. So that was hard to process. And as time went on, I tried to explain to her what my life was like. I tried telling her, hey, by the way, it's pretty hard for me, pretty painful, went through a lot. And she, like I said, was very dismissive about it. And then I had the difficult time of trying to forgive her because I hated her. I hated her. And once I started being honest with God, because before that I would say, I resent her, I'm having a hard time. I would try to minimize my feelings, especially when I would be praying or talking about it. And then one day I just said, I hate her because she's not sorry and she doesn't regret it and she doesn't feel bad. And back to the shower, saying these things to God, being very honest, because I don't know, as a Christian, I know I need to forgive, but I don't know how to forgive this. It feels unforgivable to me because she's trampling all over my life like I'm not human. And I was saying this to God, it's like what I went through meant nothing, like what my suffering meant nothing. She's trampling all over me. And as I said it, God spoke something back to me. He said, and this is hard because this is true. He said, but that's what you do to me. And you guys probably have read in the Bible in Hebrews where it says that, woe to those who trample on the blood of the covenant and who consider the Spirit of grace something common. And that kind of dismissive attitude of being like, oh, yay, Jesus died, but not thinking about the cost. I needed to start thinking about the cost because that's what I was trying to say is, look at what's happened to me. And he said, no, look at what's happened to me. You do it. So I understood that in that same attitude, when you sin and you're just kind of like, well, whatever, we're saved. You don't take it seriously. But there was a cost for that, our salvation. So I won't go into the long story right now of how I came to be able to forgive, but I'll tell you that it wasn't in the word forgiveness that I found the reality. It was in the word release and just letting it go. And saying, you don't owe me anything. You don't owe me birthday wishes or caring about me. You don't owe me anymore. So there's a story, and I'm sorry, I haven't even paid attention to the time. We're good. It's 2:15. Okay. So there's a story that C.S. Lewis wrote, and I really relate to this story. It's called The Horse and His Boy, and in the story, if you haven't read it, the boy is also an orphan, and he is picked up by a very bad man who is abusive to him and makes him, serve him. And the boy decides to run away because he sees Narnia. And as he's on his journey, running away, escaping from this lion comes and chases him. And all of these horrible things happen to him. And the boy, at the end of the story, is so weary, so discouraged. He's on his way to Narnia. He doesn't think he's going to ever get there. And he's just finished. And throughout the story, he always calls himself unfortunate. Like all these unfortunate things that have happened to him. And one time he's walking, he's in the dark, and he's just feeling so sorry for himself. And along comes someone next to him, but because it's dark, he can't see. And he starts to ask him, about his life. And he tells him how unfortunate that he is, and all the stories. And you can do the next slide. If it's Aslan. And every time I read the story, I cry because he says, I don't call you unfortunate because I was the one who brought you to that man. I was the lion that chased you so that you would come to Narnia. And I was the cat that comforted you in the night. So, going back to lies, I thought that I was unloved. But here, I wasn't at the end of the story. I was in the middle of it, where everything pointed to what I was believing. And I couldn't get over it until I saw, wait a minute, I unfortunate. I'm not unfortunate because you know what? God had a plan. Next slide. This is where I go for a walk. Before the plan came, the surrendering had to happen. And I had to surrender to his plan, not mine. Because if I would have had my own plan, it would have consisted of me being very loved and big family and all the things that I always wished for, but God had a different plan for me. And I had to choose to follow him. So this morning, as I was thinking about it and trying to put my mind together, but you're really asking for the Lord to speak, right? Because it's not just about my story. Like, okay, sad story, who cares? The reality is this. You want God to speak a word. And so this is what I feel like the Lord put in my heart this morning. He is the author and finisher of our faith. So he's writing the story of our life. But then this, he is the author and finisher of our faith. So we're not at the end of our stories yet, right? We're still going through it, so we don't know what's on the other side. We haven't gone to the end. I haven't gotten to the end, but I've gone to new chapters, and I can see a really good plan. So, like I said, I found out that I was Jewish. Now, it never, in my mind, I never dreamed. I dreamed a lot of things, but I never dreamed that I would go to Israel. Well, here's what happened. Once I had surrendered, released, I was trusting the Lord that he was the author of my faith, that he had a good plan. And I was believing him, and I was walking in faith, really understanding the cost and that faith was my part. I found out that because I was adopted, so the very thing that was the worst thing that had ever happened to me was about to be the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was a Christian, but I found out that I was Jewish. And when you guys know that Jews are returning to the land of Israel, but not Christians, not Messianic Jews, not Jews who believe in Jesus, they are forbidden. They have to stay out. They don't have a right. And legally, it says, if you've ever converted to another faith, you have no right to come to Israel. So here's the funny thing. Because I was adopted, I never converted. I was allowed legally to go to Israel to make what's called Aliyah as a Christian. So, nobody ever converted. Not my family. They're still Jewish. My faith was born out of my own. And so I was allowed to take it with me to Israel and put my papers down. And, well, long story, very long story, different time. But when I saw what God was doing with the thing that I hated the most, that was the most painful, you can't help but just glorify God in your spirit. You find yourself just praising him and being like, I never dreamed, I never thought. Look how beautiful Israel is. I love it. The next slide. That's my daughter. We live in the biblical place called Kiryat Yarim, but in English you call it Kiriath Jearim. It's the place where the Ark of the Covenant rested for 20 years. There is the spirit of peace there. I love it so much. It is such a joy. It is such an inheritance. And so, but here's the truth. God works all things together for good for those who love him. Amen. Yes. Yes. All things together. I believe it. So whatever your lie is, if you start to apply that truth to it. Even I don't even need to know what it is. But if you say, no, he works all things together for good, everything that I hate about myself or that has happened to me or that I feel like he must have forgotten that, whatever. If you just meditate on that, he works all things together for good. And that's why I am telling you this story, because it has such a good ending. And so frequently do we get to see the endings of stories. We will in heaven. So the next slide is like the balm of Gilead. The truth will set you free. The truth has set me free. And I just meditate on his goodness. Sometimes I'm in Israel and I think, like, why am I even here? Like, what is it all about? I haven't gotten the end of that story yet. I have no idea. I'm only 40, so I probably have some more years yet to figure out. But one thing he does tell me when I'm there, and this is such a joy to me, what do we get to do in Israel? Well, you guys saw the video of what we do, and it is really special. I love it. But I don't think that I'm there for that. We're not there just for the Bible college and all of that. But I'll tell you, when I go to bed and I think about where I was in the dark and how far that I've come into the light, I begin to tell Jesus, I love you. I love you. Thank you. You're such a good Father. And that's why I'm there. He tells me that's why you're here, because I want someone to be here who loves me, who thanks me, who knows that I'm good, appreciates my salvation. So before I forget, I want to say the cards that I put on the table of faith, I brought them for you. And I would love it if you would take them with you. And as you remember faith in your life, I would love it if you would pray for me. And you'd remember, because I'm going home in 2 days. And I don't have this in Israel. I don't have this opportunity because in Israel, I don't know if you know this, well, people usually think of Israel, they think of Jews, and they think of Palestinians, but they forget that there's a church there. There's a bride, but she's so small. We're 1% of the entire population of Israel. That includes Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Catholic, the whole thing. So you guys are so privileged to have each other and to have this whole tea put on for you and a church that just exists to support you. It's amazing. And I don't have that in Israel. That's something I don't have. And so I want to ask you guys to remember to pray for the church in Israel. Pray that we would be a light. Pray that we'll go to bed and we'll tell the Lord that we love him. So, next slide. 3 things that I want to say about faith. Faith is the evidence and the hope. Well, let's say it exactly what it is. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. So we talked about that. The second thing is faith is our part. So I'm not the author and I'm not the finisher, but my part is faith. It's kind of like in the play. You each have your part and you need to play that part. Your part matters in this life. You cannot believe how insignificant I felt as being in foster care, thinking you do not matter. No one even looks at you in the room when you come in. No one cares. But yet I had a part, and you guys have a part, and that's our faith. It's the only thing that we get to do that pleases God. The only thing. It's our part. And yet we're so often busy about so many other things. But he's saying, have faith. Trust me. This is what you do. And then lastly, faith is eternal. I think about this all the time. Faith is eternal. That means that my life, my faith, what I'm choosing right now, exists into eternity. Because in 1 Peter it says that our faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, is found to praise and honor and glorify Jesus when he comes into his kingdom. in eternity. So what I'm doing now has value there. We are not worthless. We are not. I love to tell these girls that. We have so much value. Our faith has value. And it has eternal value. Next slide. So let's go back to the story of the little faith when the disciples were in the boat. And they thought they were drowning. They thought they were unloved. They thought they were insignificant or that God didn't see. All of the things that we think. You can just place in whatever you think into that. And in Hebrew, when I was reading it, as I was meditating on this, because I read it in now Hebrew and English, the word I notice is the word hargea. Hargea. But when I hear that word in Israel, it's like when a mom's telling her kid, like, settle down, hargea, hargea. Or like if someone's freaking out, and this is what they say to them. So I can't help but think, when the Lord said that, he was saying to the waves, like, settle down. He was saying to the disciples, settle down. Be still. Be still. I do think that the Lord is saying to us to be still and to know that he is God. And so I want to pray. Jesus, we do love you. We're here, you know what you're doing, and you know what you're speaking. And it isn't about us, but it's about eternity. But I pray that you would help us to have faith. I pray that whatever lies and objections rise up in our heart, Lord, that you would show us the truth, and that the truth would set us free, and that you would use each story. You would be the author and the finisher. We're not finished. But our part is faith. And thank you for showing that to me, and thank you for what you've done in my life, and thank you for making my story an example, because you turn ashes into beauty. And I never believed that when I was young, but I believe it now. I'm thankful, Lord. So I pray that you bless these ladies, and let us all be together in spirit. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you.